The Nairana-class escort carrier was a British-built class of 3 escort carriers. They were constructed one each in England, Scotland and Northern Ireland to the same basic design during the Second World War for service with the Royal Navy. Converted from merchant ships, they were only able to accommodate a composite squadron of about 15 to 20 aircraft. Their armaments were mainly anti-aircraft weapons, with one twin 4-inch dual-purpose anti-aircraft gun. One of the class, Campania, was the first British carrier to be fitted with an Action Information Organisation and a Type 277 radar able to detect low-level aircraft. Once completed, the first carrier did not take part in active service until January 1944, but all three served as convoy escorts during the final year of the war. They had some success during the patrols, and anti-submarine ferries swordfish flying from their decks sank and damaged some German U-boats, and the fighters succeeded in shooting down German long-range reconnaissance aircraft. Design and description. The Nairana-class escort carriers were a class of 3 escort carriers built for the Royal Navy during the Second World War. Escort carriers were designed to protect convoys of merchant ships from U-boat and aircraft attack. Following the successful conversion and operation of HMS Activity, the Admiralty decided to take over 3 more merchant ships while they were still under construction and convert them into escort carriers. The 3 ships chosen were being built at 3 different shipyards around the United Kingdom, Holland and Wolf in Northern Ireland, Swan Hunter in England and John Brown and Amp Company in Scotland. The prototype was built by John Brown, who supplied the other 2 companies with copies of the plans. The 3 ships were supposed to be identical, but in reality they were all slightly different. Nairana, built by John Brown, was launched on the 20th of May 1943 and completed on the 12th of December 1943. She had a complement of 728 men and displaced 14,050 long tons. Her other dimensions were a length of 528 feet 6 in, a beam of 68 feet 6 in and a draft of 21 feet. Her aircraft facilities included a 495 feet flight deck, a hangar 231 feet by 61 feet, 8 arrestoirs and an aircraft lift 45 feet by 34 feet. Vindex, built by Swan Hunter, was launched on the 4th of May 1943 and completed on the 3rd of December 1943. She had a complement of 700 men and displaced 13,455 long tons. Her other dimensions were a length of 524 feet, a beam of 68 feet 6 in and a draft of 21 feet. Her aircraft facilities included a 495 feet flight deck, a hangar 231 feet by 61 feet, 6 arrestoirs and an aircraft lift 45 feet by 34 feet. Campania, built by Harland and Wolff, was launched on the 17th of June 1943 and completed on the 9th of February 1944. She had a complement of 700 men and displaced 12,450 long tons. Her other dimensions were a length of 540 feet, a beam of 70 feet and a draft of 19 feet. Her aircraft facilities included a 495 feet flight deck, a hangar 198 feet by 61 feet 6 in, 6 arrestoirs and an aircraft lift 45 feet by 34 feet. Common to all 3 ships was a traditional riveted hull. all steel flight decks than a closed hangar. They had the same propulsion provided by diesel engines connected to two shafts giving 11,000 brake horsepower, which could propel the ship at 17 knots. Their armaments concentrated on anti-aircraft defense and comprised two 4-inch dual-purpose air guns on a twin mount, 16 20mm anti-aircraft cannons on 8 twin mounts and 16 2-pounder pom-pom on 4 quadruple mounts. Aircraft assigned were either anti-submarine or fighter aircraft, which could be made up of a mixture of the Hawker Sea Hurricane, Grumman Wildcat, Fairey Fulmar or Fairey Swordfish. The exact composition of the embarked squadrons depended upon the mission. Some squadrons were composite squadrons for convoy defense and would be equipped with anti-submarine and fighter aircraft, while other squadrons working in a strike carrier role would only be equipped with fighter aircraft. Service history. HMS Nairana Vindex and Nairana were both commissioned within days of each other in December 1943, and moved to Gorik for working up. Nairana, with 835 Naval Air Squadron Fleet Air Arm on board, commenced flying exercises with HMS activity on the 27th of January 1944. Both carriers left the River Clyde on the 29th of January with the 2nd Escort Group under the command of Captain Frederick John Walker. They were to form a hunter-killer group in the waters west of Ireland, providing cover for two southbound convoys OS-66 and KMS-70. Weather conditions had prohibited flying until the 31st of January. With clearer weather, Nairana turned into the wind to send off her first anti-submarine patrol. At the same time, Wild Goose reported contact with a submerged U-boat on her Aztec, warning Nairana that she had just turned into danger. The carrier took avoiding action. The U-boat U-592 was sunk by Wild Goose and Walker's own ship Starling, while a Fairey Swordfish from Nairana circled the area. By this stage of the war, the Royal Navy had enough escort carriers available not only to double them up on a convoy escort but to permanently detach one to work with a hunter-killer group operating outside the convoy system. The 2nd Escort Group, still under the command of Walker, was the group chosen with Vindex as the carrier. As she would not be supported by another carrier, Vindex's Air Group was formed from the experienced 825 Naval Air Squadron, with a complement of 12 Fairey Swordfish MKIIs and 6 Sea Hurricanes IICs. Even though there were 12 Swordfish on board, they had only 8 crews, so the Sea Hurricanes carried out some of the daylight anti-submarine patrols. The Sea Hurricanes had been fitted with 4 racks for the same RP-3 rockets used by the Swordfish to attack submarines. Leaving Northern Ireland on the 9th of March 1944, 2nd Escort Group moved to the area believed to hold the highest concentration of U-boats. Over the night of the 12th of March, Swordfish on patrol had 28 contacts on their airborne-to-surface vessel radar. The first attack was unsuccessful, dropping 2 depth charges that failed to explode, believed to be caused by faulty safety clips. During the attack, the rear gunner in the Swordfish was killed by the U-boat's anti-aircraft guns. The depth charges dropped short on a second attack and failed to explode on a third attack during the same night. On the night of the 15th of March, 2 Swordfish got an ASV contact ahead of the escort group. Unable to see anything in the darkness, they dropped flares and sea markers over the location. When the escort group arrived, they picked up a contact on their Aztec and the U-653 was sunk. Weather conditions were still not perfect for flying, and in the following days, 1 Swordfish returning from a night patrol landed in the sea alongside the carrier. A crew were reported missing, believed killed. A pitching deck caused one swordfish to crash into the sea on takeoff, and another swordfish crashed into the sea on takeoff when its engine failed. One swordfish taking off clipped the island's superstructure, losing 4 feet off both wingtips. The pilot managed to get the aircraft into the air, circled around, jettisoning his depth charges, and landed again without mishap. Landing on the heaving deck was just as dangerous. 2 sea hurricanes and 2 swordfish missed the arrestor wires and ended up crashing into the safety barriers. On the 24th of March 1944, a swordfish with its engine shot up and crew injured attempted to land back on Vindex. It crash-landed onto the flight deck, coming to a stop 8 feet from the end of the flight deck. Leaking petrol set the wreckage on fire. A crew were rescued, but the fire exploded one of 2 depth charges stuck on the racks. A hole 8 feet by 4 feet was blown in the flight deck. After 16 days at sea, Vindex returned to port, with 2 days flying lost because of the weather conditions. The swordfish had amassed a creditable 275 flying hours and 122 deck landings by day and night. The sea hurricanes contributed another 47 hours flying and 39 deck landings. At the end of May 1944, Nairana sailed with the 15th Escort Group. On board was 835 Naval Air Squadron, equipped with 9 Swordfish and 6 Sea Hurricanes. The Swordfish patrolled day and night, and some contacts were made on the ASV. All the contact come to nothing. It is now known the older model ASV in Nairana's Swordfish could be detected by receivers on board U-boats. In May, they escorted convoys SL-157 with MKS-48 and the next group SL-158 with MKS-49. For the 25th of May, the convoys were located by German junkers Ju-290 reconnaissance aircraft. On the 25th and the morning of the 26th of May, they were driven off undamaged, but one Sea Hurricane failed to pull out of a dive, killing the pilot. Later the same day, another 2 Ju-220s appeared. One was shot down and the other was probably shot down. HMS Vindex, with Vindex damaged and needing a refit, and Campania still not commissioned. Nairana was the only ship of her class fit for sea on the 1st of April 1944. She left in the first week of April with the outbound convoys OS-72 and KMS-46. She still had 825 Naval Air Squadron on board, but this time she was overloaded with 18 aircraft, 12 Swordfish MKIs and 6 Sea Hurricanes IICs. At the end of the month, Vindex joined the 5th Escort Group. On the 6th of May, a patrolling Swordfish was contacted by 2 of the escort frigates, who reported they were in contact with a submerged U-boat. The frigates carried out a depth charge attack and forced U-765 to the surface. The Swordfish, despite the anti-aircraft fire from the U-boat, dropped 2 of its depth charges, which broke the submarine in half. Flying became dangerous in the heavy seas and poor visibility. One Sea Hurricane was damaged beyond repair after a serious crash into the safety barrier, and another crashed into the sea with the loss of the pilot. The Swordfish crews fared little better. 3 aircraft and 1 crew were lost during the same period. On the 9th of May, Vindex's aircraft lift broke down with a burnt-out motor. A crew had to resort to manually cranking the lift up and down, taking an hour to go each way. They eventually repaired the lift by moving the capstan motor through holes burned into the bulkheads. During the second deployment by Vindex, her aircraft flew over 400 sorties in 13 14 days. The strain on the aircraft began to show, and only 35% of the original Swordfish crews were still with the ship when they returned to port. It was during this second deployment that one of the ship's officers, Sub-Lieutenant J. M. Morrison, invented a blind landing system soon to be used on all the Royal Navy carriers. He modified an ASV radar set which was placed on the flight deck. The system employed the air directing officer guiding aircraft to within 5 miles of the ship. They could then be picked up on the ASV and brought in astern of the carrier at a height of 75 feet. On the 15th of August 1944, Vindex and HMS Striker joined convoy JW-59, the first Arctic convoy to Russia of the year. Vindex still had 825 Naval Air Squadron on board, but they were now equipped with the Swordfish Mk3. This version of the biplane had a rocket-assisted takeoff system and a new ASV radar in a dome on the underside of the aircraft. The extra weight reduced the crew to 2, doing away with the telegraphist air gunner. There was a full complement of 12 Swordfish and 8 Sea Hurricanes on board. The larger Striker had 12 Swordfish and 12 Grumman Wildcats. The Swordfish claimed the first success on the 22nd of August, sinking U-354, and claimed another as possibly sunk. Her rocket-armed Sea Hurricanes also claimed a U-boat damaged. Neither convoy JW-59 of the returning RA-59A lost any ships. Russian convoy JW-61, which sailed on the 20th of October, had for the first time 3 escort carriers, Vindex, Nairana and HMS Tracker. This was a large convoy of 62 merchant ships with a large escort group. Vice Admiral Frederick Dalrymple Hamilton was in command with Vindex as his flagship. Nairana had 835 Naval Air Squadron with 14 Swordfish IIIs and 6 Wildcat Vs on board for what would be the first Arctic convoy. Vindex had a reformed 811 Naval Air Squadron with the same aircraft types and numbers. The third carrier was HMS Tracker with 10 Grumman Avengers and 6 Wildcats. The short Arctic days meant that most flying would be at night. The 3 carriers worked a system of 8-hour watches. One would be the duty carrier with its aircraft aloft. The second would be on standby with its aircraft arranged on deck ready to scramble, and the third resting. The 2 Swordfish-equipped squadrons, because of the better night flying equipment, shared the nighttime hours while Tracker's Avengers worked the daylight hours. The strength of the convoy's escort may have deterred the Germans, and no U-boats or reconnaissance aircraft were detected until the convoy approached the Kola Inlet. Even then, the heavy escort prevented any attack and the convoy reached port safely. The return convoy Ra-61 was equally successful, with only 1 frigate damaged by a torpedo just after leaving Kola. Vindex had to take avoiding action after detecting a torpedo coming towards her. Vindex's inexperienced squadron lost a Wildcat pilot when his plane crashed into the sea attempting to land back on board. A Swordfish crashed into the sea following a rocket-assisted takeoff with the loss of the 2-man crew. Another Swordfish crashed on landing with the aircraft initially hung over the ship's side from its tail hook. When the hook gave way, it crashed into the sea and only the pilot was rescued. The squadron in total lost a severely damaged 8 Swordfish and 2 Wildcats that they could not fly again. HMS Campania was commissioned in February 1944. Her delay in construction meant she was the first British carrier to be fitted with Action Information Organization and a Type 277 radar able to detect low-level aircraft. She had 813 Naval Air Squadron on board, equipped with 12 Swordfish Mk3, 4 Grumman Wildcats and 3 Fairey Fulmars. Her first convoy supported by the escort carrier Striker was the uneventful JW-60 to Russia. The return convoy Ra-60 did have 2 merchant ships torpedoed for the loss of U-921. Between the 2 carriers 5 Swordfish and 2 Wildcats were lost. On the 1st of November 1944, Campania took part in Operation Golden Convoys JW and Ra-61A. This was a small convoy with only the escorts and 2 passenger liners repatriating 11,000 Russians who were released prisoners of war. They left Russia the 10th of November with the liners bringing back Russian sailors, crews for ships being loaned to the Russian Navy. Both journeys were relatively uneventful. No U-boats interfered with the progress and the only action was the shooting down of 2 Blomond Voss 138s by the Wildcats of 813 Naval Air Squadron. 1 Wildcat was lost when it crashed on takeoff. The normal Arctic convoys restarted at the end of November. Campania and Nairana were paired as part of the escort. Both ships still had their established squadrons on board, 813 and 835, with Swordfish IIIs and Wildcat Viz. The first convoy JW and Ra-62 were subjected to the first joint U-boat and torpedo bomber attacks since convoy PQ-18 2 years previously. No ships in the convoy were lost, but they did sink U-365 and shot down 2 Junkers Ju-88s and 1 Blomond Voss 138. 2 Swordfish and 1 Wildcat, with the pilot, were lost. On the 6th of February 1945, Campania, Nairana, the cruiser HMS Bellona and 8 fleet destroyers joined 26 merchant ships in convoy JW-64. This time the squadrons had spare aircrews for their aircraft, and Campania's squadron included a Fairey Fulmar fitted with the Royal Air Force AI air-to-air interception radar, for use as a dedicated night fighter. Shortly after the escorts and convoy came together, Campania's radar operator reported a target approaching. Both carriers scrambled 2 Wildcats to intercept the intruder. Campania's Wildcats got a first and shot down a Junkers Ju-88. One of the Wildcats was also shot down with the loss of the pilot. The next morning at 7:45, Campania's radar detected aircraft approaching. 2 groups of Junkers Ju-88 torpedo bombers appeared and the convoy's escorts opened fire. The ships maneuvered to avoid the torpedo attack and Nairana's Wildcats were airborne by 8:10. No ships were hit during the attacks and the bombers evaded the fighters in the heavy cloud cover. Campania's Swordfish were flying the daylight anti-submarine patrols, with a mixed armament of 4 RP-3 rockets and 2 depth charges. On the 7th of November, 835 Squadron claimed a Junkers Ju-88 damaged. The long Arctic night with only 4 hours of light a day together with heavy seas and low visibility hampered any operations by the Wildcats. During darkness the ships could hear the engines of the shadowing German aircraft closing in. Campania's night fighting Fulmar took off at 17:30, but its electrics failed as it was approaching the German aircraft and it was forced to return to the carrier. The Fulmar landed off-center, crashed into the safety barrier, putting itself and the carrier out of action. On the 10th of November, a Swordfish on anti-submarine patrol reported 30 Junkers Ju-88 Ju-88s approaching the convoy. The Wildcats took off to intercept the torpedo bombers and the escorts opened fire on them. The combined fire from the escorts and the Wildcats shot down 4 Ju-88s. 2 more were claimed as probably shot down by the Wildcats and another was severely damaged. Those Ju-88s that did release the torpedoes failed to hit any of the ships, and a number of the torpedoes were seen to detonate in the ships' wakes as they turned away from the attack. 2 of the Wildcats were also shot down by the barrage from the escorts. The combined losses had reduced the escorts' fighter cover 3 aircraft, 1 on Campania and 2 on Nairana. At 11:30 another group of Junkers Ju-88 torpedo bombers were discovered approaching. Nairana's Wildcats took off and shot 1 down. The others, under fire from the escorts, dropped the torpedoes too soon and they all missed. The return convoy Ra-64 left Kola Inlet on the morning of the 17th of February. One of the escorts and a merchant ship were torpedoed almost immediately. Another merchant ship was torpedoed that afternoon. Terrible weather conditions kept all aircraft grounded until the 20th of November, when it began to clear. The Luftwaffe also appeared and the Wildcats were scrambled to intercept them. 2 Ju-88s were shot down by the fighters, another 2 by the escorts, and 3 were damaged. The convoys had lost to enemy action 2 fighters, 2 escorts and 2 merchant ships. In return they claimed 15 aircraft destroyed, 7 aircraft probably destroyed and 1 U-boat sunk. Campania did 1 more Russian convoy JW-65 in March 1945, which had 2 merchant ships torpedoed and sunk on their approach to Kola Inlet. These were the last losses on a Russian convoy. Later careers. With the war over, there was no further need for escort carriers. HMS Nairana was transferred to the Royal Netherlands Navy in 1946. In Dutch service she was renamed the HNLMS Karel Doorman until 1948, when she was converted back into a merchantman named the Port Victor. HMS Vindex was sent out to the Far East as the flagship for Rear Admiral Cunningham Graham. On her return she was placed in reserve and brought back by her original owner, the Port Line. She was renamed Port Vindex and converted into a refrigerated cargo ship on the United Kingdom to Australia route. HMS Campania, still in escort carrier configuration, toured around the ports of Europe as the Festival of Britain ship in 1951. In October 1952, she carried the equipment to the Montebello Islands for Operation Hurricane, the first British nuclear weapons test on 3 October 1952. She returned to Britain in December 1952 and was broken up at Blyth in November 1955.